And what we have is, this is now our 8th talk, Shruti, 9th talk? 8th, yes.
This is the 10th one.
10th.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, so this is the 10th one, and we've had an interesting range of conversations for those of you who've been here, and you can see all of them now, almost. I think all of them, or how many are left to be put online? We've got written reports on every one of them on the blog, so if you want to watch them, they're all uploaded there. And as soon as we've got everyone's clearance on, removing slightly embarrassing moments in talks and stuff like that, and we will edit the talks and put up the videos or the audio recordings of the talks as well. Though I find it very hard to listen to those after the live event. So I'm kind of enjoying the live event versus I'll watch the recording later. I don't know who anyone really does that or not. Hi, Carol, welcome. Carol joins us from New York.
Hi, good to be here.
Good to
Very
be.
happy.
Good to see.
It's a little early.
I know. Well, we've got somebody from Chicago here, so they beat you.
Oh, so yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, indeed.
That's Catherine. Catherine's from Chicago.
Okay. Yeah. Hi, Catherine.
Hi.
Okay.
So just to get a sense of who everyone is and where they are, it's really nice if you just put, like Jenny has put the organization she's from. If we can all just put the organization we're from at the end of it, or for a freelancer, that's fine. Hi, Elizabeth. But I really have to do something for the East Coast. This is just not fair on you guys. Great representation coming in from the morning hours. Okay, so without further ado, the whole point is, how do we look at teaching in this time? What are schools thinking of? What are heads of schools thinking of? What are tutors thinking of? What are the key discussions that are coming up? And after the first 4 or 5, which were the conversations, very general, and they were really about the stories of the individual person in the chair, we got responses from the audience, including Nicole and Aiden, and it was a great conversation that day. I think that was Amy's, was it Amy's talk that day?
It
right.
was, yeah.
Yeah. So, and in those conversations, we just realized that there are so many different perspectives and so many stories that want to be shared. And so it was with great pleasure that I asked Nicole and Aiden if they could do one. And I asked Aiden, could he take my seat in terms of moderating and taking the questions? And Nicole wanted to share the stories at WAPA, which I thought were really great to hear what the little she shared that day. And the main point is we're really getting into stories of actually what is working, what is not, what are the things to celebrate, what are the things to be mindful of as we abandon the live space, and what are the things to celebrate as we come into this mediated space. And at the same time, and I mean abandon, temporarily abandon, really, but we are not there right now. And how do we make it all, just constantly making sense of it, because these are always going to be palpable tensions between, if any of you saw Giovanni Fossetti's talk, or you can read it on the blog. As Carol said to me in another chat on the side, it was real, quote unquote, sorry, Carol, I'm attributing this, a real kick in the head in terms of, what does it all mean in terms of this act of taking theater and jumping into this space. And Gio was very clear about what we were leaving behind. And I thought that was really interesting. But on the other side, there are a lot of us who have to go on, who need to go on for all sorts of reasons. We had the choice here as well at the DSM, and we chose to go on deliberately. But then now, what do we have to watch out for, and what do we have to look forward to? And I think that's why the title of this course, this particular talk, is Elevating the COVID-19 Performer. So without any further ado, Aiden, Nicole, I hope I've said enough context for you, but please feel free to fill in any gaps I might have left.
No, that's fantastic, Jehan. Thank you for that. Well, I'm not going to do a big intro for Nicole, and I mean, her biography is easily accessible online, but just to summarize that Nicole is course coordinator for the Diploma in Musical Theatre at WAPA. And correct me if I'm wrong, Nicole, strong background in training musical theatre performers and teaching acting to musical theatre performers, and an extensive career as a director and practitioner herself. Yeah, from a distance, elevating the COVID trained performer. It all sounds very swanky, doesn't it? Um, and it is a little bit of a play on words. And I must say, I do have a little bit of a penchant for titles for things. In my spare time, when I always make notes. I'm always writing names of theatre companies, names of bands, names of stuff. I like names. So I got a bit of a tickle out of trying to come up with a title for this one. But yeah, so from a distance, obviously, we know what that's about. But it's the elevating part of it. And what do we mean by a term like COVID trained performer? And what do we mean by elevating? I guess the word that we were playing with was celebrating. You used the word, Jehan, and that's really part of what it's about. And this came out of that discussion we had during Amy's talk. Really at the tail end of that talk, Nicole came in towards the end of that talk as we were talking about the grander, more philosophical side of the significance of what all of this means and what it means for theatre, etc. And in the midst of that, Nicole, with great verve and great passion, just came in about the front line, what she was dealing with at that time, and what she was seeing in the room from students who'd come back out of lockdown, working online, into the room, and the energy that she was feeling from that. And there was just a huge surge of kind of positivity and optimism in that I felt was really that I felt I really connected with, and it was just from that moment that this talk has emerged. And it's really, this talk does not, we're not going to take on, the philosophical side of what this means for the theatre industry. We're not going to talk about whether, online is going to replace theatre, it's going to change theatre, whatever. It's really just about the pragmatics of being on the front line in a learning and teaching situation, and to draw on, a little bit of acting technique parlance, just to accept the reality of the given circumstances that we're operating within. And that's what we do as actor performers, is we operate within given circumstances. And these are the given circumstances, which are shifting and changing, but they exist nonetheless. And what Nicole and I are interested in talking about, and this is a conversation. Nicole, of course, will lead with an with a talk about some of her experience. But it is a conversation, and an ongoing conversation that's been going on between Nicole and I, which is about optimizing the student's experience, the student's learning, and the student's performance within these given circumstances. And to celebrate the positives within that, the innovations that are being discovered within that, and just really to feed back to you all on what that experience is like. And just to contextualize, for WAPA, I think your term starts in January, isn't that right, Nicole? So you're
we're in the middle of our second semester right now.
Yeah. So just to take that into account as well. I mean, I'm just starting. We've just started into our first term in the Institute of the Arts Barcelona. So we're in a slightly different position, and I might speak a little bit about that and speak back to Nicole about that. But I think what's probably unique for your situation, Nicole, is that you've come out of an online lockdown teaching situation back into a face-to-face, which is really interesting. Yeah. Anyway, I will stop blabbing and let Nicole talk to us about her experience. And we'll take it from there.
Great. Thanks so much, Aidan. I just, before we launch in, I'll just set up a couple of logistics of the way this is going to work. So, of course, we're recording this session, but I'm hoping to show you 3 excerpts of some student work, some videos of student work. And during that time, we're going to pause the video because none of it, you'll see why there's singing and dancing and stuff. So because of that, of course, we have to be sensitive to copyright as well. And my university is very strict on that. So we'll pause at those times. Also, I'm working on 2 screens. So you're going to see me sometimes going like this, and I apologize that I can't give you my full face at those times. I also have prepared a PowerPoint deck because this is more a pragmatic session, I guess, at least perhaps in the beginning until we open it up, and who knows where it'll go then. I've got lots, not only the video footage, I've got some images that I've just screenshots basically of a lot of videos and bits and pieces that I want to show you some challenges that we experienced because we were online for 3.5 months, and the ways that we tackled those and overcame some of those challenges and found solutions, ideally so that people don't have to reinvent the wheel around the world. We were online on Monday. Sorry, we were face-to-face on Monday, not across WAPA, but in my program, we were face-to-face on Monday and online 100% on Tuesday. So I know Giovanni talked a lot about the rapid response, and and the talks have as well, talked about that rapid response and the survival and the quick solutions that we found to it. And you'll see as we go along that we got better at it as we went along. And the student learning, I hope, got better at it as we went along too. So, and during those sessions, I think Shruti is going to help us by cancelling the videos so that I can screen share with you the PowerPoint and the videos at that point. Is that right, Shruti? Yeah, great. Okay, so let me bring that up for you. I'm going to just jump into my PowerPoint, Shruti. 1 second. Have a black screen, and now hopefully you have a whole lot of people with their backs turned to us. Is that correct? Okay, great. And of course, I mean, this is quite good, Shruti, with the 6 panels or 7, however many people have down the side. That's fine. I think at this point, there's no need to off the videos, but I'll leave that in your hands. If you think that the view is needed, then please do adjust as we go along. So this, I guess, more formal part is probably going to take around half an hour. I might pause or jump at times. And then we'd really love to have some questions. Aidan and I, we might chat a bit, and then we'll open up to, I think he's going to open up to the floor. So I'm just going to reiterate what Aidan said before, that what I'm about to show you is definitely in no way to replace face-to-face theatre or face-to-face theatre training. It really is a stopgap. We saw it as a stopgap. And it was swift and it was responsive, and we didn't get it right in the beginning. We didn't get it right in the end, but we probably got it more right after 3.5 months of being online. And I just want to reiterate what I said at the end of Amy's session when we had a discussion, that since coming back face to face now we came back in August, early August, the burst of energy that the students brought with them and the creative explosion and the joy and passion for live theatre and a tactile response and physical embodiment of one being to another, even if you had to sanitize first and wear a mask and not breathe on someone, like all of that was just, it has been so joyous. And I do feel that their learning online, while it may not have been as full as what it would have been face-to-face, learning still definitely occurred. In fact, I would argue in some, and I'm going to share some of this with you, in some areas, maybe even learning, dare I be controversial, accelerated or extended in ways that face-to-face didn't allow, to the point that there's a couple of things I'm definitely going to keep into next year's program that use a blended approach from face-to-face and also online learning. But I'll talk to that in a moment. So this particular image, it was towards the end of semester when we were allowed back on campus, and but we had to be very strict with only a couple of students in the room, and we weren't allowed to be physical contacting. And you can see that on this image too, there's a couple of students who were interstate. So Australia, it takes 4 hours to fly across Australia, and so the 2 students in this particular image were working from Sydney, whereas the rest of us were working from Perth. So let me show you where we started. As I said, on the Monday, we were face-to-face, and on the Tuesday, we were online. And at that point in time, we were right in the middle of our work, including this excerpt that it was, I would call it theatre, even though it was online. And I'd call it theatre because of several things. The first, that it was live. The second, that it was a shared experience and even a shared space. And I'll unpack that in a little bit. I believe it was embodied. I felt that the students were very much inside their body. They were very tactile. They were very sensual. They were very physically holistic and connection of mind and body and soul and emotion. And then the fourth is that there was a connection to their own space, and in fact spaces that I think if those 4 things could be factors of theatre, they are for me. But then for this particular performance was a theatrical performance, even though it was online, but I'll come to that in a moment. So let me share you a little bit of an excerpt of our starting place. And this was our starting place. Like I said, the students were partway through, so we're experimenting. There's great things about this, and there's also some problems about this, which you can probably already see from the still. But let me just swap video for a second and show you a little 45 seconds of this. To reiterate, we were learning as we went along, okay? And Shruti, feel free to start the record again. I think you are. Yeah, great. And we were learning out how to work online as a stopgap and make the most out of technology, and also how to continue our music theatre skills and our music theatre knowledge growth, but also how to develop, which is kind of sits overarching in the training, as positive, ethical, creative young adults. And I just want to read you a little excerpt of a paper that I've written. Was nothing to do with COVID and nothing to do with being online. It was just theatre training in general. It's yet to be published, but I feel that it applies in as much in an online setting as it does in a face-to-face setting. It's just a couple of paragraphs. So in my practice, I hope to enable students to live in alignment with their values, to be respectful of others, to be curious and open to diverse views, to take ownership and strive to do their very best. I aim to provide students with leadership opportunities to demonstrate and facilitate initiative and innovation in creative projects, and to foster effective communication, teamwork, and organisation practices. I believe that this promotes a community of practice, and I'm referencing Love and Wenger at that point, that equips students with discipline-specific, transferable knowledge and skills, and enables them to innovatively overcome challenges if and when they arise. I feel that this combination, discipline, expertise, the ability to transfer skills, and the fostering of creativity, which sit within a community of practice landscape, collectively provide students with the know-how, capabilities, and confidence to pursue excellence in their music theatre practice, and that this combination helps to prepare them for employment in the future, long-term employment in the performing arts industries. So being online, yes, some skill development was hindered. Being online, yes, there is a limit to the type of theatre that one can create, but even so, I believe that there are many things to celebrate and elevate about the COVID-trained performer. And what I want to do now is just share with you some quotes that I received from the students towards the end of last semester when they were giving bits and pieces and feedback. There's much more that I could share, but here's a handful anyway. And I've got a few more if I'll just go to the next screen. And if we, I mean, I would hope that those things are always surfacing in the way that we work together and the students' experience in learning. But I do believe that COVID and being online really meant that we had to delve into things about communication practices and leadership practices and how we create together collectively but be separate and isolated, that perhaps honed in and fostered some of these skills more explicitly and perhaps with more awareness at times from the students. And I think that that's a bonus, and I want to find ways in the future, even if we are face-to-face or in a blended capacity, that I keep enabling some of those things. That's really important to me. But, you know, I don't know exactly how, but anyway, that sits in the back of my mind as I look at this semester and into next year. What I now want to show you is I want to talk about a particular piece of work. I said I'd give you a few examples. So this is an example where in the second half of our first semester, so we went online in March, late March, and first semester. Our first semester finishes in the first week of July. So soon after we'd been online about a month, I guess, we then looked at the golden age of music theatre, that whole period sort of around late 40s, 50s, when we have people like Rodgers and Hammerstein writing musicals, as well as a whole host of others. And I've taught a particular unit across several subjects, including in acting, acting through song. So when I say we, myself and my colleagues, history of music theatre and several show choir, a few other subjects like that, where we focus on the golden age. And one of the things that we've focused on as well in our dance was the dream ballet concept that was born in the golden age, really as a vehicle for showing off certain talents, but very much made its mark. So we see it sitting in musicals like Oklahoma and a lot of other works of the time. And in the past years, we've explored it. We've done a routine in jazz dance, or actually usually in song and dance. We've studied it in history. We've taken songs from it and worked as solos and duets in acting through song. And but I feel that in the past, it hasn't been as integrated as what it was this year when we were forced to do it at 100% online. And so here's some of, especially the dream ballet aspect, and the way that the dream ballet is like almost a psychological look into character or relationship, or into themes of a particular musical, as well as a showpiece for people of the time. But in 2020, I think we focus more on character, relationships, themes, etc. So when looking at this, I'll focus on a class acting through song. I was able in COVID to have the 26 students across the country working from their own individual homes. So I would play from the piano and they would all be on the screen, but they would be on mute primarily. So I'd teach them a bit of something of a song, and they would be singing along with me. So they could hear my piano, or they could hear my instruction or even my demonstration of vocals, and then they would sing it as I played and went along. So I was coaching them, if you like, in real time. And then they would share a bit. They might demonstrate a bit themselves. They would sing either in a cappella, so without music, or they would sing with a backing track, which I'd pre-prepared and sent through to them prior to that class. But what it also allowed me to do, being on live with Zoom, was that I'd jump between, we'd sing something, they'd experiment with something, and then I'd show them a video clip or something from YouTube, or we'd listen to a recording right then and there. So they were switching between experiential learning, theoretical learning, like that. It was so quick, and I've never been able to do that before, or as to integrate the history component and the context component as I could when we were doing it this year online. And then I'd put them into breakout groups, so then they'd discuss and they'd philosophize about different things. Maybe they'd even show their partner some work, again with a track, backing track or a cappella. They'd discuss it, they'd come back, I'd throw something else at them. Maybe it was a dance thing that they were doing in their living room, and then again they would show bits and pieces. So I feel I'm going to keep it next year. I'm going to keep it being taught in two ways, two classes per week. One part will be face-to-face and experiential, COVID permitting, and the other will be an online component where we work exactly as we did this year. So I just want to show you one of the students' final pieces of work that they then submitted. And in the assessment, what I was able to do was to say to them, take any music theatre song from a golden age musical, turn it into a duet, and add a dream ballet. So they had to insert or loop music, if you like, to have a section that explored character, relationships, themes, psychology, etc., of whatever focus they were doing with that particular song. And so let me share with you a song that two students did for that particular assessment. Just give me one sec while I swap across. And Shruti, if we can pause the video at this point. Let me just come back to here. So, I mean, obviously they changed the context if you do know the original, but I really think that they succeeded in meeting outcomes around, yes, they had a dream ballet sequence in the middle. Yes, they explored text and relationship. Yes, they understood context. And one of the most important things I think that became my mantra when we were online was they'd ask me, can we do blah, blah, blah? And 99 times out of 100, I would say yes. Do whatever you want. Do anything you want. Here's the criteria. Here's the outcomes. here's the basic content. If you think you can cover the content and achieve these outcomes, do anything you want. And it just gave them permission to do anything you want, including in this case, we didn't see much of them actually singing and then match with the visuals, but you know, they came up with something that I feel is really interesting. It's not theatre, it is a movie musical, but the content at that particular point and the outcomes were not about being doing something that was theatre. They were about vocal technique that was golden age. They were about relationships that were, and dream ballets, etc. That was all the golden age musical, and they certainly achieved within those outcomes, I feel. I think not just this particular task too, but a lot of the tasks that we were doing and the way we were learning online meant that also so they had permission to do anything any way they wanted most of the time. And then also the more introverted students, I feel, were able to flourish more in general than when we were face to face. So, you know, music theatre tends to be full of a very lot of vivacious and often extroverted people, not always. But there still are those who are a little bit quieter, and they were able to speak up because when they were in the breakout rooms, they could still have the conversations that perhaps they wouldn't share to the whole room. Or they could go back and watch a video or watch a clip or watch a class or do an exercise at their own pace, formulate their own thinking if they needed a little bit more time, and then share their ideas. So I feel like probably more students were captured in terms of learning style through a use of live, we called them live and dead classes. A dead class was a video class or here's a series of exercises, do this exercise, go to this website, do this link, etc. Or live, which I said as before was through Zoom. But that was the end of the semester. So you can see it's quite different from the beginning of, not the beginning, but the beginning of COVID when we started. What I now would love to do is to just show you one more excerpt, and this is probably the longest excerpt that there is. But this is where we actually did a big chunk of a musical live. At the end of the semester, there was several different assessments, and this was one of them. So I'm going to show you a clip. This is if we can just pause the video, Shruti.
Applause.
Thanks, that's really lovely of you. We had so much fun doing it, and we did the first, so this is kind of a bit of what we did. We did the opening section of this, and great Shruti's recording again too. So I'm going to now highlight a couple of things that we did to make it work, because there are so many problems with doing music theatre online, particularly anything that has music and ensemble work. You spoke before about ensemble work, Jehan. So, I mean, it's different ensemble work, but still. So I think the first thing that we had to do to make it work was, obviously, we made Zoom the dramatic world of the play. So this is normally done live, and we actually, it was as if COVID had hit and the competition was going to be closed down, but the P&C committee said, no, our students' learning must go on, so we'll do it online. And that was the premise of the piece. I think, I'll talk about some of the things that I feel helped it. So the students had to individually design and recreate their own spaces at home. And they absolutely took a space and reworked it, and used ideas about obviously character and the dramatic world and the setting and the given circumstances, and also then the style of the piece to create their sets, if you like, within the piece. So that's where we start. Well, one of the ways we started. We didn't add in a lot or change, like obviously there was there's the occasional word to make it work on Zoom, but this was the only bit that I felt that we needed to explain to my peers. This wasn't for public viewing, it was just for my peers and the other students, as in my colleagues at work. But we added that scene setting introduction in the beginning to actually obviously make people know that it was the dramatic world of the play was via Zoom. We added this video flashback insert into it. The rest of it was live. we staggered the entries. So a bit like you can listen on Zoom and not have your video on, the other actors they were listening, and we worked out so that we could have no trace of them to be on Zoom. And then we just jumped them in as they would enter onto stage in a face-to-face version. We varied the spatial depth and the physical direction. So if we talk about embodiment and connection to space and holistic acting, you can see here, this is a still from the bit just after what I showed you. And, you know, they're facing different directions, they're doing different things, they're using their space in individual ways so that they can connect to the space, but also obviously live that dramatic world of the play as if they really were in their own living rooms or bedrooms or wherever, kitchens. And we also played around with the idea of creating a shared physical space. So you can see here the two characters that have the circles around them as if they were brother and sister. So there was a lot of times across the bit I showed you, and then also the next bit after that, where they stood up and they had dialogue and bits and pieces or singing things to help connect their world. And that was obviously carefully rehearsed because they were in totally different locations. We also, here's another, I think this was in the clip I showed you. So as if the person in yellow, the female in yellow, was the child of the man in the kitchen. And so there was a bit of interaction between the two, again, in totally different locations. I'm going to use Amy's term, and I put question mark after it because I haven't done Amy's rewilding program, but just hearing her talk about it, I suspect that maybe we're in the land of her rewilding by the ways they utilized the space. So this is another song that happens almost directly after the other one, where it's called, they all havoc breaks loose, right? And you can see that they're interacting with set pieces and props in truly physical embodied ways that are also individual yet collective at the same time. We tried to create intimate spaces, I guess the version of the stage whisper if it was live, by playing with depth of field in the video and having people lean in as if it was a secret that supposedly was an aside that couldn't be heard by certain characters. We brought pets in sometimes. So this person is singing to her pet, her dog, in the rules, which happened just after the bit I showed you. We had family members come and take part in the piece as well. So this is one of the actors' dads who had a little 2-second cameo kind of part where he interacted with his son and played his dad in the piece, where the text actually does allow a little bit for some audience interaction. So we found ways around it. We changed locations. So the top image here is where one actor is moving from the living room into his kitchen and moved the screen with him as he went along to end up in the kitchen. And then I think if we just pause here for a second, look, music theatre obviously lends itself to something heightened, because often the acting style is heightened and the characters are heightened, you could even say at times exaggerated, but we still strive for authenticity within that. So even though music theatre lends itself to being online perhaps in this way, it doesn't lend itself to being online because of the asynchronous sound. And this is the biggest challenge that we have. Even then, I suspect that what you were hearing was slightly delayed compared to what you were seeing. For me, it's live, but it's synchronized, but for you, it's probably not. But that asynchronous sound is such a really big problem and still hasn't been solved globally as to how we can synchronize sound. There are certain systems around. There's that look at low latency, high latency streaming. I won't bore you with them. Maybe you already know about them. There are things like Jamulus and Clean Feed, which are music programs which you can use. However, they have problems with you can't hear yourself back. So you have to go through a digital means, a recorded means, which means you have to listen to yourself as you share the sound through earphones and things, which doesn't necessarily lend itself to a live performance if you're singing, for example. So I didn't go into use any of those for the teaching that we did, but that means the choreography is problematic because I assume the students right now are all actually on the beat with the choreography, which means their head would be like this. but because they experience the sound slightly differently, you can see by their heads, which are probably supposed to be on beat 1, that they're out of time with each other. So what we did was put very little of the choreography to be in such a clear way on beat 1 that was close to the camera. If it was on beat 1, it was much further, we'd say upstage. For them, it is upstage, and then you didn't notice it as much when you were viewing it. We used a lot of stillness so all the one in the circle is moving and the rest of the actors are still. So we'd alternate stillness and movement to again help I guess realize the dramatic action and the relationship. In the next one here, it's the reverse. So only the center person is still and the others are all moving. We used a lot of depth in our choreography, so where you would come from close to the screen to far away from the screen, because then it didn't matter if I was slightly out of time, because to the viewer it looked like we were in time together. So if we just go here from close up to mid shot, I'm calling it mid shot, it wasn't, to being upstage and far away from the camera. We also took choreography and then the students individualized it, so it didn't matter if their beat 1 was different to somebody else's beat 1 by a 10th of a second, because they had personalized the choreography. We also had bits that were out of frame with things that were in frame. So again, it didn't really matter if things weren't quite synchronized. We had to be really careful with our props. So a lot of the props were just out of reach of camera, just there. And then again, when moving in, it didn't matter if you were slightly asynchronous. It looked like it was in sync together. But the biggest challenge was with the vocals. And sorry, I've got one more visual to show you. Actually, this one, you can see that there was choreography of throwing paper around. And again, because there's so much fluttering, it doesn't matter if we're out of sync with each other. And then choreography had to be adapted. So although most actors are upstage doing a little march choreography, the one who's circled is about to sing. So she had to come down and adapt her choreography to be close to the camera at that point, so she could then sing. Because we noticed if you started singing in an ensemble number upstage and came down, the Zoom didn't know which actor to grab hold of in terms of sound. So we had to adapt the choreography in that way to allow for that. And of course we had to find our microphone. So in dealing with the music specifically and the vocals, we experimented with all the different students had different needs with their tech. Some were using speakers, some were coming out of the video, out of the computers, some were using phones, and they all had to play to their own strength. And it took a lot of experimenting to find that, but it certainly paid off in the end. What have I got here? Oh yeah, and this meant that the vocals were amended because there's so much ensemble singing in it and it doesn't allow for synchronous sound. We had to simplify things where maybe there was only one or two characters singing rather than 5 or 6 characters singing at a particular point in time. We also changed, if we did have more than one person singing or 2 people singing, the background chorus, we kept the vocals, but we changed it to a non-lexical sound. So they would sing an ah or an oo, which usually would translate. This is not just in this task, by the way, this is in a lot of tasks at the end of semester when we were looking at live material. The oo and the ah seemed to work for Zoom better than actual lexical or verbal words. It could pick it up. And then also we timed it to sing over another's track. So that particular track I showed you, it has a lot of people interjecting into other people's vocals. So we sometimes started that interjector's vocals a split second early. So they felt like they were singing ahead of time, but actually it came out on time. Or we would cut a long note short or things like that so that the Zoom knew which vocals to pick up, which camera to pick up. We also worked with, actually before I talk about pre-recorded harmonies for a sec, actually I will. So we talked at the end of that particular track, you saw there were pre-recorded harmonies, and that's the only bit that had pre-recorded harmonies where we would send the track from student to student to student to student. They'd overlay they wouldn't overlay their track, they'd sing their track they'd play the backing in one device, and they'd sing their vocals into another device, and then someone cut them all together so that it sounded like it was quite good quality sound with overlaid vocals. But then at that time, for dramatic action, I just couldn't have them all singing and then not singing on screen. So I gave them something else to do, as if they were texting each other the words at that particular point, to make it seem like it was part of the dramatic world again. And that was what was coming up on their phones. One most important thing is we simplified the sound. So we only used piano. We didn't use we didn't have multiple instruments. We simplified the harmonies, as I said, and that particular track you saw was cut into 7 backing tracks. So that one song was 7 sections, and the students were literally, where's my phone? They'd have their phone just off camera here, and they were doing something, pressing play on their phone, and somebody else was stopping on their phone, and ideally it just synced one into the other. And hopefully my colleagues and the other students who were watching didn't notice that the sound was actually cut up, or the backing track was cut up. And that took a lot of rehearsal and a lot of experimentation, but we feel in the end really helped again to create this world of the play and be as close to a face-to-face musical shared ensemble work as we possibly could whilst being online. So that's what we did. And I'll just reiterate again, it's not to replace face-to-face. It was reactive, but there are things that I am going to keep, because I believe that they did develop in certain ways around communication, teamwork, creativity, plus certain content areas like the golden age, that I don't feel are just responsive to being online with COVID, but actually take the online learning environment and milk it, capitalize on it in order to extend the learning and achieve the outcomes in new and exciting ways, so that it's almost our teaching pedagogy is, our methodology is broadened rather than replaced, if you like. So there you go, that's what we did. And I'll just kill my screen now and stop sharing so that we can all jump back on. There we go. I know it was long. I hope it wasn't.
Nicole,
I tried to make it
so much. Thank you so much. There's lots of interesting questions coming in here in the chat. I'll just preface, I'm going to address some of those, but I just want to preface it by saying, you know, of all of these talks that I've been to, it is just so lovely to be reminded of what performance is and to see samples of that. And there is something about the wonderful discipline of musical theatre that just lends itself to that exuberance, that just reminds us of the joy in performance, and what, you know, why we do it in the first place. You know, it's so easy to get to lose contact with that, and it is amazing what can be done, and it's amazing what can, and what's interesting about this, of course, is I imagine you discovered all of these things on the fly. It was just kind of, you know, on site, on the moment problem solving, which is brilliant. And there's so much knowledge and experience to bring now into a situation where you can pre-plan and be prepared for a potential online situation again. Lots of interesting questions. I just want to say one thing. This is just a provocation of my own, and then I'm going to address people's questions. Something that I have consistently found incredibly moving and incredibly touching in seeing samples of work on Zoom and online is the sheer intimacy of it. There's something so profoundly intimate about young performers rewilding their bedrooms, and seeing them in their domestic spaces. And it does, I've found consistently, it brings something out of performers that is not so easy to achieve in a shared live space, in an ensemble. And I think that's something that's really, really, really interesting. And it brings us back to something that I think is where we all started as performers, which was in our bedrooms. I know I did. When I was a kid, I just started acting in my bedroom. I just started playing characters, making up stories. You know, there's something very beautiful about that, about these circumstances bringing us right back to kind of where students, the impulse to be performers in the first place comes from. Anyway, I just think that's a really beautiful thing. But there's lots of very interesting things coming in. I think some questions are quite technical. I think some of them you've answered already, actually, as your talk progressed. Was all the singing live, Paul? Was that Paul?
Most of it was. Yep.
Yeah. Internet lag, etc. for synchronous. I think we talked about that, particularly for the choral work. Jehan raised that. And then there's lots of interesting. Jehan has raised a very interesting question again, which is to do with the giving the students permission to do whatever they want, or 90% of what they want, as long as it fell within the learning outcomes and the content, etc. And how that there's a question around that, about holding the space and about giving students, how much autonomy do we give students, how much do we guide them, how much are we hands off, and where do we strike the balance there? How is the space, the learning space, held differently in a situation like this than perhaps it might be teaching live or in more traditional ways of working?
Yeah.
I don't have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I do. I mean, you can say do anything you want, and 3 people might do something they want and everyone else might not do something they want, and in the beginning. And we found that people would learn from each other as we went along, myself included. I think there were only a couple of them were good at videoing or had done a little bit at school, editing, and the rest. The thing that amazed me is they're so good at this stuff. They're so much better than me as a 48-year-old, woman. They jump on and they find software that's free, and they cut things and they teach each other. And they, if I found if you gave them permission to do something that, even if they were trepidatious at first, slowly by slowly, they would learn off each other. And part of that was then they would share things along the way. So it's not like writing a history essay, I guess, or something where you give them some things and they go and write it and then they submit it. It was scaffolded all the way through, and there were drafts and sharing and look at this, and can you show me a bit? Or I'd break into, I'd jump into someone's session and show me what you're doing at the moment. Okay, what about a bit of this or a bit more of that? Or have you seen what this group's doing, and connect them together. So it's definitely guided. But also you trust them that they're going to, as long as they know what the outcomes are, they know what the purpose of the task is, or they know what content they're studying. So some things have to be very explicit and very clear, and perhaps you even talk about them more than you would in a face-to-face environment. But then they know what some boundaries are, and then where the elasticity is. And not all the time it worked, and sometimes it went down a bit of a rabbit hole. But again, as a group, we would learn from that and come back and flip it and change it and know how to do it slightly better, for the next kind of task at the same time. But the most important thing is saying yes in the beginning. I have some people who are not just here at WAPA, but you talk to people, and I remember people go, "Oh, we can't do it. What if it goes wrong? What if it's not the right thing to do?" And all of those things are very valid questions. I also knew that I had 26 people in front of me who'd signed up for something and who wanted to learn and were hungry to learn and were asking for guidance. And I felt I had a responsibility to give them the best possible thing I could. So my attitude was always yes, we can, and a situation will present itself. We'll work it out as we go along. And if we get it wrong, no worries, we'll tweak it, and that, I think, brought sense of playfulness and joy to what we were doing, which was similar to being face-to-face and in the regular studio.
And absolutely. I mean, teaching online forces you to be collaborative with your students. You have to. You've got to meet them halfway. They've got to meet you halfway. And I think there is something in that. I remember when I was in Falmouth University, I'd started to, in terms of teaching and learning, I was involved in the teaching and learning committee there. And I started to really wonder, I started to notice that very often when we took our hands off the students and became more facilitatory, and just created the spaces, very rigorously created the spaces for them to be more autonomous, they produce better work. And I really started to wonder, were we over teaching? We're just teaching at them. But sometimes there is something perhaps to be understood about a situation where you just have to create the framework for a meaningful collaboration. And that very often, I'm not sure if it's always the case, but very often students produce very high quality work in those circumstances.
Can I ask a small follow-on question to that?
Yes.
Just the idea that now that you've gone back into the space, this idea of this different teaching and learning dynamic that you discovered here, how much of that comes back into the space with you afterwards versus going back to being the teachers we used to be?
I, I don't know if I can answer that definitively, but I can give you an example right now. So at the moment, they're creating original cabarets in small groups. They got to choose the numbers. So we have some groups of 3, we have some groups of 5. I think 5 is the biggest number. It might be a 6. And I'm finding that, you know, certain tasks lend themselves to collaboration and more of a hands-off approach. And this is one of them. So they've got at the moment, we've set it up so they have a coach in the morning with the music director who's also going to play, if they want to play for them. Some of them are choosing to play themselves in bits and pieces, and who will coach and guide them. They'll bring material and then they'll go away and they'll work. And then in the afternoon, they'll come and see me and I'll work with them. And it's been amazing, the autonomy and just letting them do what they want, as again with these kind of signposts along the way. And then today the MD and I worked together with the students in the same room, and I feel that we're able to perhaps let them we're hands off a little more than we were last year, and they're certainly better at things like, they're better at getting their music to you on time, and they're better at their sheet music, and they're better at coming up with, you know, who's going to choreograph this? Okay, great, go off and choreograph it. When are you going to show it to me? Okay, great. What about if we tweak it like this? Like, they're really great at doing that. And they always were, because they're quite keen and hungry. But it feels like they're a little bit better at it this year. And it feels like I'm a bit better at knowing when to step back. It feels like that. I guess I have to wait to the end of semester and really truly reflect on that and see if that did stick. But I suspect it stuck, at least in some ways.
Great. I'm just, this is kind of a follow-on. There's a really nice question here from Sarah Weston. She says, thanks, Nicole. She has a question about the skills the students felt they learned. She's interested in the skills students get from performer training that are broader than the skills for performance. She finds it really interesting that communication and time management came to the forefront in this work. And she asks if you think that the skills that are often seen as a byproduct of theatre and drama training actually become more prominent through online practice than they do in a studio or rehearsal room.
I do. In fact, it's highlighted to me that I need to be more vigilant moving forward and actually teaching those skills and building them into tasks so that perhaps they're even assessed. I mean, I don't know if, we're in the middle of our bachelor. We have 2 programs, a diploma and a bachelor program, and I teach into both and I run the diploma, but we're rewriting the bachelor program right now, and we're looking at how can we embed more skills explicitly and in that scope of the holistic trainer around communication, around teamwork, around autonomy, around like those things. And COVID has shown that if you do teach them or make them more explicit, then it seems that students, right? This is all guesswork, really. It's just one experience, but it seems that they get better at that. And so we are also more conscious of it. And I think that I plan to be more explicit in teaching that in the future, for sure, and to continue that this for the rest of this semester.
Another question here, but just picking up on that one, you know, we talked about the COVID trained performer, and I think the idea of that, Nicole, when we were talking about it, was the idea of, you know, a student having trained in WAPA or in IAV or whatever, and in 3 years' time meeting their friends. Oh, where did you train? Oh, you trained during COVID. You're a COVID trained performer. And we thought, what would that, you know, that they are a unique generation of trained performers, and what that might mean, and what a COVID trained performer might have that perhaps a non-COVID trained performer. And again, I'm just kind of speaking back to what you said, but I think there's a skill set emerging out of this experience that these students will take away, that perhaps, not to say that the other students wouldn't have it at all, but perhaps with a different quality or different emphasis. Yeah. So Jenny, let me see. yeah, I think I'm not sure if this is a question or comment from Jenny, but I just want to read it anyway. Jenny says, having spent so much time apart, how is the trust in the face-to-face? My students had 3 weeks together in the room before lockdown. When they came back after the first lockdown, they felt they half knew each other. Wow, that's interesting. But not trusting so much physically with each other. That's very interesting. That's very interesting.
Yeah, it is a challenge. Ours had I think it was 4.5 weeks before we went into lockdown. And that was a concern too, that we would become so isolated and so autonomous that we would be, if we ever got back, which luckily we have here in Western Australia, it would spill out in ways like mistrust, or we'd take, we'd have to kind of start again to build those dynamics. And I think that because we were so vigilant, I tried to be vigilant at continually mixing up exercises and continually mixing up not just accessible things either, just the day-to-day classes. I kept throwing, okay, you work together, okay, you work together, who you show, okay, breakout room here, okay, come back and show me, okay, go work with this tutor or that, and because they were kept mixing things up, and then as so much of that work, they were asked to do tactile things. They were asked to, like, have you seen this, because this is, whatever it is, like, just having to interact in that way and being exposed with what we would call in film, which is not my thing, but extreme close-up, that although there was a little hesitation, in fact, like, I don't even think there was. They were almost all over each other, to the point that, stop, physical distancing, stop, don't touch each other. What are you guys doing? Remember, oh yeah, hand sanitize, watch, wear a mask, all of that. But I feel that if we hadn't been as vigilant during the process of being the 3.5 months of being online, of mixing it up in that way and finding ways for them to be as tactile as they could and as exposed and reflective as they could and collaborative as they could, that they probably wouldn't have been so. And I think also in the diploma program particularly, there's a lot of creation. They have to create their own works, and so consequently they're looking at things and they're questioning things that they may not question as much if they were just working with found text. What's important to you, or what do you feel about this theme, or what? So they were having to expose parts and be vulnerable with themselves. I mean, of course you can do that with found texts, but there's something about creating original works. And when I would say, well, what's important to you, go make a play about it, that kind of fostered that too, which was a payoff when they came back face to face for trust and relationship and community, collaboration, etc.
And my guys, they know, a lot of mine, because I'm doing a diploma of theatre arts, so it's a year-long course and almost like starts to become a pathway to a major drama school for some of them. Others just going out into freelance work, but a lot of them coming straight out of high school. So we had the 3 weeks where they'd sort of just started to know each other, and they become kind of friends and starting to trust. Then we were in the first lockdown. We created actually a soap opera online as part of their improvisation work, and it was horrible, and I spent hours kind of editing it in iMovie, but they kept learning, like with the first episode, like us watch, and then they go, we took so long to get to the point, like it was really great, but by the end we were just laughing hysterically at some of the things we did, but then we got to come back. This is in Victoria. We got to come back for a few weeks, just a couple of days a week. And now then we've been thrown back out again for 12 weeks now, but they're working now on their plays that they wrote in the first half of the year, some of which are good, some of which are not so good. But normally I have to choose which plays we're going to develop for theatre, but now we're actually doing all 19. I've got 19 students, wow. All 19 of their plays. They've actually, which we couldn't do if we weren't in lockdown, they've actually been able to, the writer's been able to direct their play. We were going to do a moved reading that we streamed, but we couldn't come back. So now we're actually going to do it from our living rooms. And today, working on them, what they've learnt with Zoom now, I'm quite excited now for their friends and family to watch it and to hear the work. They're still just reading it, but we were creating fight sequences and
awesome.
Somebody's having a panic attack, so the other two actors are going, you all right? Like,
yeah.
in the camera. So I think there's really, as you're showing, some really great stuff to use.
That's really exciting.
I myself am in a position, I've mentioned before in other talks, that I directed a production, an online a Zoom production of The Lower Depths, Gorky's The Lower Depths. And I mentioned already that we didn't change the fictional given circumstances. We set it in turn of the century in a homeless shelter in Russia, which was interesting. What came of that was the same thing I see in your performance here, Nicole, same level of intimacy. I mean, Drew Mulligan, the head of acting, he commented on that. He felt that there was a purity and an intimacy in the performances that he'd never quite seen in students before. What's really interesting for me now is I'm now taking those same students at the beginning of second year in person for Shakespeare. I've had one session with them. And I'm very interested to see how they start to relate to each other, particularly working with heightened text with that material, how they re-enter the space, because there was, they worked beautifully together online. So there's so many interesting questions and things to discover. Jehan, I'm aware of time. This is where you might want to give me a steer here in terms of. Do we have time for any other questions? Any other comments?
Well, we should wrap in the next 3 to 5 minutes. Because we normally stop at 45 past the hour.
Sure.
So I'll leave that with you to decide how. But, and the only thing I had to say was next week, not the same time, 1 hour later, and we will have the amazing Faye Simpson, who teaches the lucid body technique. She's based out of New York, speaking about movement pedagogies. And in Aidan's chair will be Sita Mani, who gave the third talk here. And I think that the two of them know each other really well and can really speak a lot about how to move forward in these times. But Aidan, I will leave it to you to close.
I will just wrap up by saying, Nicole, thank you so much. There are really so many, just through the sheer pragmatism, just showing us the pragmatism of what you had to deal with face-to-face on the front line actually raised a lot of very large philosophical questions. We said we weren't going to make this one philosophical, but actually it does raise larger questions. And that's really interesting. But thank you so much for all of that. Lots of food for thought. Thank you everybody for being here with us, and it's an absolute pleasure, and I'm delighted to have met Nicole through this, and I hope we'll keep in touch. Nicole.
Me too.
And I will say thank you to Aidan on behalf of all of us for leading this conversation today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aidan.
Who logs off here, Jehan? How do I do that?
Shruti will tell us what to do, but we can stop the recording now, Shruti. Thank you all.
Thanks again.